Innovative Leadership, Building Education for the Future, Symposia 2021. Distinguished education thought leaders and presenters, other esteemed education colleagues, education leaders, teachers, and valued students, a pleasant good day to you. I am Dr. Viola Rowe, an executive member of the Caribbean Visionary Educators. On behalf of the executive members of the Caribbean Visionary Educators, CVE, and under the astute leadership of Dr. Freddie James, the president of this august body, it gives me genuine pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all in attendance at CVE's inaugural symposia, August 18 and 19. Symposia 2021 is not by happenstance, but is strategically positioned to signal CVE's alertness to the contemporary demands on teaching and learning against an educational landscape triggered by, for example, the fourth industrial revolution, globalization and internationalization, and now the COVID-19 pandemic. Hence, CVE continues to cement its position as an emerging and powerful body dedicated to building and supporting teachers and teaching across the globe. This historic event is welcomed at this time. Over the next 2 days, you have the opportunity to listen to and interact with our distinguished presenters and thought leaders, and to create, expand, and/or strengthen networks with professionals who represent various education systems across the region and across the globe. Please be generous with your questions and comments during your interactions. Once again, welcome to day 1 of Symposia, August 2021. At this time, I call on one of our CVE directors, Ms. Alicia Messiah, to open our session with a prayer. Ms. Messiah.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us this morning. I'd like to invite you to bow your heads as we begin in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to come together today as we open our symposia. As we gather together today, dear Lord, we ask for your comfort and your peace to be with our fellow neighbors in Haiti, Jamaica, and other islands in the Caribbean that may be facing certain difficulties at this time. We ask, dear God, that your blessings will continue to be upon them and that you will grant them your strength during this difficult time. We ask also, Lord, that you will bless today's proceedings, bless our speakers and participants as we unite in our commitment to transform education. We pray that you will bless those in charge of conducting today's session and ask that their tasks will be completed successfully. Open our minds and hearts and grant us wisdom as we gain knowledge that will aid us in becoming better educators. We pray that our minds and spirits will be renewed and that we will be able to put into practice all that we learned today. We thank you for your presence and blessings and ask these things in your holy name, Lord Jesus. Amen.
Thank you very much, Ms. Messiah, for your word of prayer. And indeed, at this time, as we ask God's blessings, we stand in solidarity with all the nations across the region, the nations suffering from our quake. We remember you in our prayers. I now invite our president and founder of CVE, Dr. Freddie James, to bring opening remarks. Dr. James.
endorse the previous protocols established by the chair of this event. Distinguished keynote speakers, colleagues, friends, good morning. CVE began in the imaginations of some educators who saw it as their purpose to empower and commit themselves to inspire the change and improvements that they want to see in education. CVE was launched on July 1st, 2020, in the midst of the pandemic. And through the work of its industrious executive team, it has provided a number of resources and professional learning and development opportunities to grow educators globally. You can view our accomplishments for the past year on our website. The document is titled Accomplishments of CVE 2020 to 2021. Our successful collaborations and partnerships have brought us to this space here today, whereby we have 6 of our region's finest leaders in education sharing with us over 2 days. This is in of itself remarkable. We asked you, our members, for what you wanted to make you more prepared for the innovative work that you as 21st century educators are called to do. And we responded by putting together these symposia. We thank our esteemed presenters kindly for agreeing to partner with us to share their knowledge and expertise freely with you. I can imagine your anticipation, and therefore I will not hold you in any more talk except to say, educators, let's do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. James. Let's do this. Thank you for the historic account of CVE. I am sure participants who are not members are enticed and encouraged to subscribe to our website and YouTube channel and to follow us on Facebook. In the next segment of our program this morning, you will hear from our keynote speaker and other education thought leaders. We will listen to each presenter for 30 minutes. Any questions you have during the presentation must be posted to the chat. Our team will compile all questions at the end of each presentation and submit these to the respective presenters for response. I'm happy at this time, and it's with great pleasure and honor and pride that I introduce our keynote speaker for CVE Symposium 2021. Professor Paul Miller, our keynote speaker, is a Jamaican-born British academic and professor of educational leadership and social justice. He is president of the Commonwealth Council for Educational Administration and Management, CCEAM. In 2016, Professor Miller became the first Black academic in the United Kingdom to be appointed to a professorship in the field of educational leadership and management. And he is also one of the 150 Black professors in the United Kingdom. Professor Miller is editor of the journal Power and Education and founding editor of the journal Equity in Education and Society. Professor Miller has over 100 peer-reviewed publications, including the acclaimed The Nature of School Leadership. Professor Miller is principal consultant and director at Educational Equity Services, a consulting firm he founded in July 2020, specializing in equity, diversity, and inclusion, in particular, anti-racism. Participants, I now hand you over to Professor Paul Miller. Thank you. Professor Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Madam Chair, for that introduction, and to President Dr. Freddie James for the kind invitation, and for everyone else who has been, helping me behind the scenes to on board with the program, with the technology, and so on. It's my absolute pleasure, colleagues, to be able to join you today for this inaugural day of your symposium, and I hope that it will go really, really well, not only from today's keynotes, but also tomorrow and the years to come. Congratulations as well on your first year anniversary. I want to speak a little bit around leadership for equity and inclusion, and look at it through a triple activism approach, and also bring to bear some evidence from practice, some evidence from educators or educationalists in Jamaica and in the UK, where the case study research was done. I want to speak briefly about some conceptual issues, looking at some key terms so that we can all think about them in the same way, and then present some case study information around this topic, looking at the work of education professionals in Jamaica and in the UK, and then discuss for us this notion of the triple activism, and then problematize the notion of social justice leadership, and then end up looking at social justice leadership for inclusion and equity. Colleagues, we talk about equity and we talk about justice, but they're not all the same thing. And so it's important for us to understand these slightly nuanced differences, but important differences between these concepts. So equality is about giving everybody the same level of support, equal treatment, and equity is about means-tested interventions. You are supporting people at the point of their need. And this is really, really important in our work as educationalists. If we are supposed to help our students, if we are supposed to help our colleagues, we need to understand their names, we need to understand their stories, we need to understand their circumstances in order to be best able to support them. And if we think about justice, we have to think about as well to remove the obstacles that require the intervention in the first place. Because if people haven't got obstacles in their ways, then they can thrive. Or the fewer obstacles they have in their ways, then the more they can thrive. So we have to think about this in the context of education. Poverty, social deprivation, high school fees, distance to travel, and a number of other social and economic ills, lack of access to technology, and so on. And so we think about these concepts in our work, and in the work of the Caribbean visionary educators in what it's trying to achieve and what it wants us to think about, even in this exercise. If we think about diversity and we think about inclusion, these are two other words which we hear, bandied about. And I like to put it, if we think about diversity, we think about painting all the leaves on the tree in multiple colors. But if we think about inclusion, we are thinking much deeper than that. We are not only saying paint all the trees in multiple colors or the leaves on the tree in multiple colors. What we are saying is you are invited to the party, regardless of who you are, whatever your religion is, or even if you have got no religion, whatever your sexual orientation is, whatever your gender is, whatever your gender identity is, whatever your politics is, and you're welcome to dance. We will make sure that the music we play, whether you're in a wheelchair or you're on a crutch or crutches, you know, we will have something for you because we are being inclusive. So these things are really important for us to tease out, not only conceptually, but also thinking about our practice and how we do these things in practice. I want to share, colleagues, in the time that I've got left, some work which myself and other colleagues have done in Jamaica and in the UK. And this paper we produced is called Social Justice Work as Activism, the work of education professionals in England and Jamaica. In this study, we asked some questions. We asked education professionals, you know, to think about how they understand and do social justice work in their everyday job. So we asked the questions: what does social justice mean to you? And that's important, in particular, as I've just gone through those terms, because different people sometimes think about social justice or inclusion or equity or justice to mean very different things. So it was interesting for us to get a sense of what educationalists thought the social justice means to them conceptually, but also to them as a practice. So how do you do social justice work in your job role? What impact does your practice, your doing of social justice as a leader, as a practitioner, have on your organization as a whole, and or on individuals within your organization? Because we appreciate the work might be directed towards the organization as a whole, but it might also be directed towards individuals. And we know that you know, the sphere of influence that a head teacher has, a teacher will have less sphere of influence, but will have sphere of influence no less, you know, or no less important. So I think it's important that we understand that as well, that change can come from whatever position we occupy. We just have to own that agency. And then in what ways can you improve? Because social justice work is not something which is, you know, it's done and tick the box. Social justice work is work which is always going to require us to be thinking further about how we can improve, even when we have done excellently. How do we improve? How do we create more sustainable changes? And how do we reach other people who might need support from us? So the first theme that came out of the paper, what does social justice mean to you? The question, the theme we pulled out of that was understanding social justice. And these are some of the snippets that came from colleagues. Social justice means respecting the rights of individuals. Social justice means demonstrating equity and in the distribution of resources and privileges and opportunities. And if we think about some of these things, you know, respecting the rights, demonstrating equity in how we distribute resources, so we don't have preferences in our allocation of resources, and privileges, opportunities, and so on, among members of the society or the community, in this case, a school. It is also about fighting for the rights and reasonable interests of my students, my colleagues, and myself. So this notion of fighting is important because it is about seeking that justice element. It is about not simply giving the intervention to level up, as we saw from the diagram, but it's taking down the barriers that creates the need for leveling up in the first place. Social justice means equity and fair treatment in how resources are allocated. So you could see some commonalities as well. How workloads are designed, really important. Who gets to teach the low ability learners? Who gets to teach on the graveyard shift? Who gets to teach on Friday afternoons? And is this an annual recurrence and so on? And is there any justice in how these curriculum and workload and teaching is designed? What about single parents and and people with families and so on, young families especially, and all of that kind of thing. So it's really thinking through some of these issues, as I said, not only in how people understand them, but also in the practice. Next question we asked colleagues was, how do you do social justice work? So how do you do this in your practice? And if you see all of these positive these verbs here, I use the university's rules and regulations and policies. And you might think this is quite problematic, but actually what this colleague is saying is, the rules are there not only to be followed or to be adhered to, but also we must look for the sort of opportunities to use the rules to enhance our work as social justice leaders. So you're not only simply conforming or confirming, what you're trying to do is to take the rules and make them into living documents or living symbols, and to move forward the work that needs doing. People talk about, I ensure students are not shortchanged by delivering on the university's obligations to them. I consider students' interests and create opportunities. I lobby for students and for colleagues by making representations. I advise students and my colleagues. And you could see how they do these things. People are reflecting on their own practice and their work in the area of social justice. People talk about, again, I work with my students and my colleagues to identify strategies to maximize time, to maximize resources, and so on. And I raise concerns of inequity. So different kinds of activisms happening among these participants because of the kind of issues that they are confronted with. You can see some people are changing structures and changing systems. You could see that some people are taking things forward to their leaders and managers for them to change systems and structures. But whatever they do, you do find out that they are actually doing something. They're not just simply saying, okay, the girls in my class are not learning, and I'm going to put my hands up in the air and I'm going to cry. No, what do you do about the fact that the girls in your class are not learning? And that point, again, about the first point, I use the university's rule, reminds me of something that one of the Jamaican prime ministers, P.J. Patterson, has once said, that the law is not a shackle, but a source of social, or a tool for social engineering. And so it's again finding the opportunities to use the rules to create opportunities for social change. What's the impact of your work? What impact does your work have as a social justice leader or practitioner on your organization and on individuals? So the impact of your work. And this head teacher says, my staff and students have taught me lessons about my role as a leader. And as a result, I've been forced to be more reflective before and after my encounters with them. And this is really important because it shows that in fighting for the rights and the reasonable interests of her staff, she's also being developed. So her work is not only having a developmental impact on the population that she's trying to protect or to serve, but the interaction with the structures is also having a developmental impact on her. And I think it's really important for us to identify that as well. It's like the process of mentoring, where we know the mentee will get something, but the mentor also gets something as well, whatever that is, however that is defined. Another colleague says, my practice also impacts students, and I demonstrate equity in distributing resources and privileges. And she talks about when students fail their exams marginally, and colleagues want to remark to find a couple marks or two. She insists, on not only finding the one mark or two to give those two students, but to try and find a way to potentially, allocate a new tests or a new mechanism for everyone else to benefit as well. And so it presents this kind of tension that here people are confronted with dilemmas in their work, but this is how they have approached these dilemmas, because they're not only fighting for one student, or they don't want to be accused of having favorites, but they are trying to create some kind of liberation for all students. The other theme here was about what can you do to improve your work, and I think this is really important for us to think about this. Many times we do something, and as I say, we think about it as a sort of a checkbox. I've done it, been there, done that. I've got the T-shirt, but how can we improve? So this theme was about widening and deepening social justice work, and this was very reflective because it put the participants into a position to reflect on their kinds of lacks and deficiencies, but also their kinds of opportunities to do more work. And if you see again these kind of commitment statements, I will seek to more effectively model emotional intelligence, which is really important. I will ensure that appropriate programs are put in place. I will also ensure that all levels of staff are providing with training and developmental workshop to build them intellectually and emotionally. And this head teacher went on to talk about, the workshops that she provided for her ancillary staff, the groundsmen, the kitchen staff, and so on. And they were doing training in child protection and in all manner and all sorts. She gave all kinds of examples that when I'm giving out all of these training opportunities, it's not only for the academic teaching staff, but it's for the entire staff population. That's really important for us to think about. I will model social justice practice. And this modeling of social justice is really important. How can you improve? I'll improve by modeling it so I can hold myself accountable to the others. And so that in others emulating me, I know that I've got, to keep on point. I will ensure that appropriate parenting workshops are provided to parents to build their self-esteem, which will in turn help to build the self-esteem of their young people. So you could see this head teacher has a 360 degrees vision of social justice work and her role in widening and deepening social justice work. And in the middle, she situates herself. She said, I will model it. She's working with parents. She's working with the ancillary staff. She's working with the ground staff. She's working with the teaching staff. She's working with the administrative and technical staff and the guidance department. So what she has actually done is diagnose her organization and has given a very good account of how she'll be able to make improvements around social justice. Another participant said, I'll continue to speak out against race and ethnic inequality in education. I'll have to work much more collaboratively. And that's important, that collaborative working is important. We know that there is strength in numbers. We know that 2 + 2 = 5 in the concept of synergy. And so we have to think about collaboration with others. And of course, there are some people who are quite obstructive in our work around social justice. And we can't pretend like everybody will be interested in doing social justice work. But we have to find ways around those people and reach into other people who we will be able to collaborate with around the agendas that we are interested in. Because there's somebody out there who is also seeing what we are seeing and feeling what we are feeling, and perhaps is in the same space and the same place. And actually you reaching out to somebody is perhaps what can make a difference. Somebody else talked about, I can improve my practice by engaging colleagues more. Again, that notion of collaboration, of talking to each other is really important. No good, you are doing this good work and you're operating in a silo, an intellectual silo or a practice silo. I can improve social justice work. I will need their understanding and their patience and the support from my staff and my students and so on. And this notion of impatience, it was something which was central to the paper as well, because the expectancy, the level of expectancy from staff and students sometimes became quite high, in particular if you're doing a good job in knocking down some of the hurdles, or in particular, if there are urgent needs which have confronted members of the school community. So colleagues, out of that model, out of this paper, my colleagues and I produced this model, which we call the triple activism, in which we argue that the work of educationalists, myself, yourself, all of us, comprises a triple activism. And we feel very much that your work, my work, is all of us, our work in education is situated within this notion of the triple activism. So, for example, when we talk about the pedagogic activism, we're talking about the content and that we deliver to students, not only the instruction. If you think about instructional leadership, we're talking about the content, but it's also the pedagogic leadership. It's the how we deliver this content. So the pedagogic activism, is looking at the content, but also looking at the process of delivering this content to learners, to young people, so that they are engaged. It is saying that we are delivering an inclusive curriculum. So the child who is disabled, the one who has got no faith, the one who is from the LGBTQ plus community, the one who is shy, there is something in our content, but also in our pedagogy that reaches deep within that child and says, I see you, I hear you, and you belong. And it's really, really important that we understand how important this is, that we can say to our young people, and even if we don't say it out loud, but in the pedagogy that we provide for them, I see you, I hear you, and you belong, because they need to know that. And even if we don't speak those words, in the way we devise our content and in the way we deliver that content, they will know that they matter, and they will know that you take them and their stories and their histories seriously, because the case studies that you provide in class, the anecdotes and so on, it will be constructive. It will be building them up rather than tearing them down. We won't take swipes at them, but we'll validate them and we'll empower them and so on. The next one is about the regulatory activism. You saw in the paper my colleagues talk about fighting, and that notion of the law being not a shackle, but as a source or as a tool for social engineering. This is what colleagues were saying, that the rules are there, but where we can find the rules to liberate, we must use our sense of agency. The rules are not only there to constrain us, but the rules are rather there to liberate us. And it's a new way of thinking about the rules. Many of us see the glass as half empty, but many of us never see the glass as half full. And it's a new way of engaging with the regulations. But also importantly, how long ago have those rules been written? How long ago have they been constructed? Are they fit for purpose? Are they fit for the times in which we are living and working at the moment? And so we have to then think about this regulatory activism in a new way as well, where we need to chant down the rules that no longer work, to find our agency, to lobby the head teacher, to lobby HR, to lobby whoever, to say these rules no longer work. They are causing harm to members of our community, and in their place, we can put in new rules and new systems. A good example of this is COVID-19 and teaching online. Many of us could never have imagined that our governments would have allowed this thing, because it's not a reality that we have known. But this is what all of our governments across the world have been doing. They have changed the rules to fit the context. And this is about regulatory activism. How can we fight the oppressive rules in our organizations, in our classrooms, that do harm to members of our community, whether that is our staff or our students and so on. So we have to push back against these kinds of systems and that's about regulatory activism. You hear the colleague talking about, I fight and I fight and I fight. The third activism, colleagues, is the emancipatory activism, which is what I like to describe as the fire in your belly. It is what wakes you up in the morning to go to work when you know that you're going to have a hard day from your students, or you're going to have a hard day from your colleagues or from your line manager. It is what keeps you grounded. It is that moral purpose. It is that desire to create social change. And if you are coming at this from the right place, this emancipatory activism will take hold of your pedagogic activism and make you even a better pedagogic activist. And it will take hold of the regulatory activism and make you want to disrupt and destroy those systems that don't work. So I think we have to find that fire in our belly, and each of us have got to find that fire in our belly. For me, it's around racism in education. It's around any form of oppression, gender-based violence, and how we care for deaf in education and all of those things. How do we do some of these things? And that fire in your belly will help you to do your work much more robustly and in a much more committed way. So I shared, colleagues, the paper from Jamaica, which I hope has been instructive. But not all head teachers understand social justice in the same way, and not all head teachers do social justice in the same way. So I cite here Rinell Lee Piggott and Lancelot Brown and Dennis Conrad and others from Trinidad and Tobago, who found out in their paper that many principals were unaware of a social justice orientation. And this is no fault about head teachers, by the way, but this is a fault about how head teachers are trained. They also talked about the fact that many head teachers in Trinidad and Tobago were doing social justice as guesswork because they didn't understand it. And it reminds me of a paper I did back in 2014, paper was published in 2014 for some work I did with head teachers in Jamaica, looking at the notion of successful school leadership and effective school leadership. And in the study, the head teachers, the conclusion was really surprising to me, because in the study, the head teachers, the conclusion was the head teachers did more. So they're doing of effective leadership, and they're doing of successful school leadership outpaced their knowing of social justice, of effective leadership, and also successful leadership. And that was really surprised, a big surprise to me. So I looked again at the data, and I didn't bash the Jamaican head teachers at all. My conclusion was not that Jamaican head teachers did not know social justice, effective leadership, or successful leadership. No, rather, my conclusion was that the Jamaican head teachers are doing so well at effective and successful leadership, and they would do a better job if their knowing would be enhanced, as because the knowing would then enhance the doing. So I think it's really important, and I think this is the kind of same conclusion here that Conrad and Piggott and Brown have reached, that actually head teachers in Trinidad and Tobago are doing social justice work as guesswork, and they are doing it from a place in the bottom of their belly, but they haven't got the language. And this is why national colleges for principal development, whether are so important, or master's courses taught in the universities, are so important in helping to shape head teachers' understanding of their practice. So they are doing it. They are doing it from the belly bottom. It's called subliminal knowledge, or as Kolb talks about, it's that experiential learning, because they will know what good teaching or what good leadership looks like. But if they had the language frame, if they had the kind of conceptual frame to work with, their doing of social justice leadership or effective leadership would be enhanced. Colleagues, I've got 2 minutes left. And I want to just drill down on this, that social justice leadership has 7 characteristics. And if you are a social justice, if you are a leader on the call, or a teacher, I invite you to consider these characteristics, social justice leaders actively try to right wrongs. Talk about that triple activism. They actively try to right wrongs inflicted on marginalized groups. And marginalized groups, race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, all of those things, actively try to right wrongs. They use their position to create safe spaces and opportunities. So they don't use their position as a blocker. They don't use their position as a meal ticket. It's not about me. It is about how I can contribute and I can use the space and the position that I have to level up. So they use their position to create safe spaces and opportunities that promote equity between individuals and groups. Thus, social justice leadership is activist in both its intent and its approach. In other words, social justice leadership is deliberate. That guesswork that we talked about in the previous slide won't work for us to do this right. It might work for a kind of happenstance, but it can't work if we need to get it right, if we need to have deep, meaningful, and sustainable impacts. Thus, social justice leaders understand the material, economic, social differences between different groups. In other words, you know the people in your school. You know what will work for the working class student is not the same thing that is going to work for the middle class students. You know that the student who travels 10 miles out might be late because they are coming on the bus and there might be several buses. And so you don't give them detention, or you don't get them to stand out, in the corridors and make a big fuss and embarrassment for them and all of that kind of thing. You understand that what will work for the Christian student will be different for the Muslim student, and what will be different for the girls will be different for the boys. They understand the material, economic, and social differences between different groups. It is with this understanding that they focus on creating equity-based opportunities for all. Furthermore, social justice leaders move beyond equality debates to equity debates by setting out to change systems, right? That regulatory activism comes back in again, to change systems and processes and structures to better respond to the needs of young people. Social justice leaders are activist leaders. So one of the things you see there, colleagues, is this activism, the triple activism. Social justice leaders are activist leaders who work to create fairness in schools for all who study and work in them. And that's really important, not only the students, but the staff and all categories of staff. And social justice leaders interpret their roles as working towards student empowerment and equity for all. So their role is not to be a blocker, nor their role is one of having a meal ticket or a big position and you sort of beat your chest and no, it is working towards student empowerment and equity for all. Of course, the challenge is, colleagues, how do we see ourselves within this paradigm? How much of this do we do? If we had to do a kind of a self-assessment, how do we do this as individuals? And how do we do this as organizations? What are the examples that you can provide about how you do this social justice leadership? How you lead for equity and for inclusion? How you level up for staff and you level up for students, for the marginalized, for dispossessed, for those who have no voice? Do you give voice to them or do you take away their voices? Finally, colleagues, social justice leadership and leading for inclusion and equity then is complex and requires us to think about the unique characteristic of every person in our community. They are not the same. We need to understand the material, social, and economic differences. It involves the principal making inclusion and equity central to their message. We know that a school is judged on that sort of pass rate, how many people get 5 GCSEs or how many persons get 5 CXEs and all of that. But that can't be the most important thing. What's the ethos of our organization? Where is the care? Where is the respect? And those things should not be tack on. They should be central, because when people feel a sense of belonging, when people can identify, remember what I said earlier, in our pedagogy, we should be saying to our children, our young people, our staff, I see you, I hear you, you belong. And so we should be making sure that this kind of sense of belonging is right there in everything that we do. And also it's creating that culture of diversity and inclusion, and developing a shared language around that. And also using the skills that you've got from the staff and the students that we've got in schools, because staff and students are plugged into networks, some of which we are not plugged into, and we can't know everything. So it's really important for us to be thinking then of how we do social justice leadership. Colleagues, those are my remarks.
Thank you very much, Professor Miller. I would like to, at this time, invite Ms. Latoya Papanet to lead the question and answer sessions. Persons who are following us on YouTube, your questions are all collated and are sent to us. Persons who have submitted questions to the chat, Latoya will now take us through this segment, and she is going to feed the questions to Professor Miller. Thank you. Latoya?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, participants. So, as Dr. Rowe rightly said, we are collating all of the questions that you have sent to us, and I will direct those questions to Professor Miller. Right? We have a limited time to answer those questions, so I'll try to cover as much as possible. You are reminded, feel free to send in your questions to the chat, and we will direct them in the time that we have available. First question comes from, first question, the participant says that they like the quotes that you gave from P.J. Patterson, Dr. Miller. And the question says, can you give some more examples of social justice in education?
I think it's going to be social justice in education is going to be really contextual. So the way you do social justice leadership or social justice in your classroom is going to be dependent on the context. There cannot be any effective judgment of school leadership, either the leaders or the teachers, without thinking about the context. Context shapes leadership, and leadership shapes context. And therefore, you have to know the students that you've got in your organization. You've got to know the parents that you're working with. You've got to know the school board that you're working with. So the issues that and the community in which your school is located. Having said all of that, I think it's really important for us to think then, okay, let us say we've got a problem with staff representation. Let us say we've got a situation where there are qualified people in our organization who are not being promoted because of their qualifications, but they are promoted because of their long service. That is a social justice issue which needs to be looked at. Are the right people getting the job? And we're not disrespecting people with long service, but has that become the trend? Has that become the kind of approach that people get promoted through? And what does that mean for people with talent and people with vim and enthusiasm who are coming in who feel like they don't matter? If we think about our LGBT students or people from the LGBT community, how do we make them feel welcome in the classroom? What about our teachers who are from the LGBT community? Do we, and we know this happens in the Caribbean, do we create all kind of scandal on them? Or do they have to hide? Is there a safe space for them to come out? What about schools that do we have? Many schools have students who are from different faiths. Do we have sort of a common prayer room, or do we only have a space for Christians, and so on? So it's really, really important for us to think about the issues that are in our own context. And then we can try and drill down on those issues. If we think about social class, for example, students who are poor and located in rural communities, how can we work with those parents and those students to level them up rather than making their poverty become the thing that distracts us and from seeing their humanity and seeing them as humans, sitting in front of us or trying so hard to get an education to improve their circumstances. But instead we see their lateness rather than all the structural issues. How do we work then with those people to address those kind of structural issues?
All right, thank you. Thank you for that. So let's continue with the second question. Second question says, does the level of ignorance that leadership can display, does that level of ignorance have anything to do with their level of training for the job that they are doing?
I think, not many education systems have got national colleges for school leadership. Jamaica is fortunate to have the National College for Educational Leadership, and they are doing some work in terms of principal preparation. I know as well that CARICOM, and I know Dr. Laurette Bristol is on the call, CARICOM has produced a whole set of standards to support the development work of teachers and school leaders and teacher educators. So I do think training is a really, really important part of what is going to help head teachers to understand their work and to benchmark. And if you've got national colleges for educational leadership or similar, National College for Teaching and Leadership, as it is called here in England, then they should be taking the lead on supporting this work. And where that is not the case, then the tools that CARICOM and Dr. Bristol and others have developed, then the education ministries should be taking those tools and using them, to develop head teachers and teachers. And where the ministries don't coordinate this work, then universities and colleges offering programs in teacher preparation and development or head teacher preparation and development should find these tools and benchmark their practice around these tools. Because one of the things we realize is that many people are coming at leadership from a sort of esoterical, conceptual basis, and it's very abstract and on all of that kind of thing. And the theory is important, but what people want is a frame to hang their their practice on. But what people don't want is to know 10 and 20 different theories. What they want to know is actually social justice leadership has these characteristics, or effective leadership has these characteristics. So there is an important place, for training, professional training. And as I said, everybody needs to be building and anchoring this on something, whether it's the universities or the colleges, or the ministries or the national colleges, but this training needs to aggregate around the established tools which are there to support leadership and teacher development.
Training is indeed important if you want to get effective leadership. So I'm moving on to the next question, and this next question says, how do you choose, and this is based on when you spoke about fire, right? So the person says, how do you choose between the fire in your belly and the fear of being victimized?
That's $1 million question. Thank you for that one.
Yes.
I think if we think about our history, as a people, if our forebears had allowed that fear to dominate them, then our liberation, we wouldn't have our liberation today. Women wouldn't have voting rights, for example. But I do understand that it's an important question, and we have to think again about our context. And maybe instead of going guns blazing, it is about building alliances, with other strong people in our organization, or going to your head teacher or your leader with the data. Leaders like data, and they like a win as well, where they can pat themselves, So it's important for you to think about the raw material you're dealing with, and the raw material, they mean your leader and the context within which you're working. And then you design that approach. So I would say the data is important. I would say building alliances is important. But importantly, I would say don't let the fear drown out that fire, because if you haven't got that fire, then you will not, one day you will look in the mirror and you will not like what you're doing. You will just begin to get quite angry about your work, and it's because you're frustrated because what you really want to do in terms of making change, you feel like you're hamstrung and not being able to do that.
Agreed. So we do not put out that fire. Use our data, use the information that we have, look at our context, and then make the decision. All right, so our next question. How would you introduce social justice pedagogy in schools that have low trust among staff and students?
I think, if you come back to that notion of the pedagogic activism, this is about the students. Ultimately, we are here for their liberation. So I think we have to get to a state as leaders where we can empower all our teachers to feel like, it's okay to want to liberate your kids. I remember a couple of years ago when I came home. I resigned my job at university here and at Middlesex, and I came home to Jamaica to contribute to national development. Bitten by the Vision 2030 bug. And I always say this to my students, my master students who are doing educational leadership at University of Technology, that they came for a qualification, but what I gave them was an education. And that's a huge difference, we have to understand ourselves. What is my role as a teacher? Or what is my role as a leader? Is it to safeguard the interests of the students, or is it to mind the rules and the image and so on of the school? And all of those things are important. I'm not suggesting anybody should be reckless, but I do feel like teachers need to be reminded that it's okay to be entrepreneurial. It is okay to be creative. It's okay to take risks. And leaders too need to be reminded of that from the Ministry of Education and from the education officers and the education advisors and so on, that, it's okay for you to think outside the box. It's okay for you to tear down the walls. It's okay for you, as long as you don't bring the school into disrepute. What we want is innovation. What we want is creativity. And we want teaching and pedagogy and leadership that liberates people. We don't want you to protect the rules and to protect the institution to the point where, you have not had any rounded impact on our students. Yes, they are coming out there with their 5 GCSEs. But that's all they're coming out there with. It's almost like you have turned them into machines, but you haven't really opened their eyes to the horizons beyond the 5 GCSEs. And I think leaders need to reassure their their staff rather, that it's okay to do that. And Ministry of Education need to say to teachers as well, to leaders, that's what we want you to do. And if you get it wrong, then we'll stand with you. But actually, that's what we want you to do. And that is the purpose of education. So children should not only come here for a qualification, but an actual education that suits them and boot them up for the global world in which we are living.
Yes, definitely. We need to take the initiative. So next question. What day-to-day practical strategies can school leaders employ to help teachers take a step back and monitor their own biases so as not to perpetuate inequities?
I'm going to be a little bit biased here, but I think the first thing that I would say is the tools that Dr. Bristol and others have developed, which are freely available on the internet. Download those tools and have conversations with head teachers, have conversations with staff, and say, well, okay, how can you benchmark your practice around this? When I was training to be a teacher here, although I had completed teacher training back home, I remember we had 44 standards to demonstrate evidence of practice against, and we had to find 3 separate pieces of evidence against each item within a standard. So I remember having 7 folders for my QTS, qualified teaching status, just demonstrating evidence. And I think, I'm not asking, people to have 7 folders, but I think it would be interesting for head teachers, for school leaders to engage teachers, you know, around pedagogic activism, around assessment for learning, around content and design of learning, around technology in learning, around feedback and appropriate feedback approaches and so on, and get teachers, as I say, to benchmark how they do it, and then they'll be able to establish gaps. I also think it's important that some of that responsibility is delegated to heads of subjects and heads of department, and there's a big job of work to be done with our middle leaders. You know, we know that many of our middle leaders get into the positions that they get to, not because they are managers, but because they are experienced teachers. And so how do we skill those people up to be able to carry forward the tremendous successes which they had when they were a teacher? You know, but we realize that many of these people, when they get into leadership, their relationships with colleagues change, and sometimes they too get frustrated. So that is the kind of joined up thinking where I would think head teachers need to take those kind of tools and have conversations, regular conversations with staff, but also support their middle leaders, because the middle leaders are the bridge between the administration and the actual practice that happens in the classroom.
Nice, thank you. So definitely conversations are important if you want to see change. Our next question: how can we incorporate social justice within our education system when persons in policy decision-making positions are more personally driven than professionally driven?
I think that's an important tension. I think it's a really important tension. When I looked at, you know, Jamaica has this Vision 2030 document, which sets out that, you know, this ambition that by 2030 Jamaica should become a developed economy. But when I read through the education sector plan of Vision 2030, what I found was that social justice was not mentioned at all in the document. Never once mentioned in the document. And I have pointed this out to the ministry as well. So I think the strategy from government must align with the ambitions that the nation states has for the schools. Never mind the fact that we have got all kinds of personalities. We will always have all kinds of personalities. You know, Jesus had 12 disciples, we are told, with all of them with different personalities. But I think the strategy from the top really needs to be clear. And therefore, if people understand that this is an expectation of their jobs, you know, that you're going to be, as a teacher, when it comes at the end of the year for your performance management, you're going to be asked to demonstrate 3 examples of how you have done social justice in your teaching or in your practice. And as a leader, when you go before the board to think about your own performance management, you have to demonstrate that. So there's that culture of accountability and that culture of sustainability that is created through the strategy, the corporate strategy that the government develops. But if governments have missed the opportunity to include social justice in their official diktats, and therefore in the official mechanisms by which they measure the performance of teachers and leaders, then I think we will always have the space for too much personality and not enough, you know, activism around our work in terms of the outcomes.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for those responses, Professor Miller. So we have come to the end of the questions that have been shared so far. And I just want to share one comment, right? So thank you all for the comments that you have been sharing in the chat. So we have been getting questions and comments. And I'll share one comment. The person says that thank you so much for advocating the regional standards. It was not possible without the contribution of regional leaders like yourself. So that's just sharing one comment, and I'm going to hand back over to Dr. Rue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Ms. Papnet. Professor Miller, thank you very much for your contribution. Your motivating and inspiring presentation is very well received and gives an excellent platform for building education for the future, recognizing the value of students, recognizing the value of each teacher, regardless of race, gender, religious persuasion, economic, financial status. So questions for education leaders and questions for teachers as individuals. What am I doing? How am I doing it? Are we looking at social justice? And that fire that you talked about, it's more than passion. I am used to us talking about passion, but it's gone beyond passion. It's that burning within to do the right thing. So you're leaving us blazing and burning, filled with that fire within to ensure that social justice is on the front burner in education leadership across. Thank you very much. And of course, as teachers, our role is the liberation of our students, the empowerment of our staff, and the liberation of our students. Thank you very much for that. Professor Miller, we are aware that you have to leave us at this moment due to prior engagements. We want to thank you again, very profoundly, and we wish that you have a very good rest of the day.
Thank you, colleagues, and good luck with the rest of your conference.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Professor Miller.
Thank you very much, Professor Miller.
At this time, I would like to recognize our keynote speaker for day 2, Dr. Schott. Thank you very much for being here with us, Dr. Schott. We welcome you, and we look forward to hearing from you tomorrow. Participants, our next speaker for day 1 is Dr. Sylvia Henry. Dr. Sylvia Henry's career has spanned diverse areas in education to include primary, secondary, and tertiary teaching, literacy diagnosis, educational administration, curriculum development, and policy development. Dr. Henry worked as a senior education officer at the Ministry of Education, Barbados, with responsibility for various departments such as curriculum, school supervision and management, and tertiary education. She has been a classroom practitioner in Barbados and New York. In 2009, she joined the Cave Hill campus of the University of the West Indies as an instructional development specialist. Currently, Dr. Henry is the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, where she provides leadership in developing and demonstrating appropriate teaching learning strategies, curriculum planning, and program and course design. Dr. Henry coordinates the postgraduate certificate in university teaching and learning, which offers professional training for lecturers. Dr. Henry is the chairperson of the Board of Management of Ardison Teachers Training College in Barbados. Participants, I now hand you over to Dr. Henry. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rowe, for that introduction. It's really an honor to follow Professor Miller. He took me back to my days of study when social justice classes were very interesting for me. And it made me reflect on a professor who taught us, very few persons of color. It was probably one of 2 or 3 in that class. And he said to us that we will not have any significant Black leaders, furthermore, Black president, as long as we live. I mean, it was really, to hear Professor Miller, it was really nostalgic for me. And it really reignited that fire in my belly to keep fighting for social justice. I felt his passion, and I saw his love for social justice. So it is really an honor, as I said, to follow after Professor Miller. So let me just start sharing my screen. And I want to thank Dr. James for the invitation. I welcome all you colleagues here on this call. And I extend special congratulations to the members of the Caribbean Visionary Educators Association. And thank you once again for inviting me. The topic today, as was said, is school leadership in the digital age. And as long as we get through this session successfully, you will be able to recognize how school leadership has shifted over the years. You will be able to define digital leadership, and you will reflect on what is required of a 21st century digital leader. Now, I'm not sure of the demographics of the persons here in this symposium, but how many of you can really identify with this image or the imagery of the headmaster of long ago, who was really a person who was revered by all? And he was, or she was, the everything began and ended with that headmaster. He was, in many cases, or she was, the cornerstone of the school. A lot of emphasis was placed on the exemplary qualities and characteristics. The person had to be creative and painstaking, of good physique, attractive, clean, smart. A lot of emphasis was placed on that person as the headmaster or the head teacher. Even the social qualities of that person. And I'm not sure, as I said, how old persons are here, but the headmaster, the headmistress of long ago had to be someone with social standing in the community. If a parent could not manage a child, that parent would take that child to the headmaster in the community to ensure that the child could listen and had the upbringing that was required. A visionary figure. This says the headmaster occupied a prestigious place in the school and in the society. So much was the focus of the headmaster or the headmistress long ago. And even when we think about, reflect on the responsibilities and the roles, and I can say, I worked with a headmaster whose main focus, and he took great delight in ensuring that he can manage the facilities of the institution. So I was given the task on many occasions to sit in the office of the headmaster and later the headmistress to go over the inventory of the desks and the chairs, how many broken furniture were there. And we all, I'm not sure if those listening could remember the Board of Surveys. We had to ensure that all the broken things were written on an inventory, and and if they could not be used anymore, they were then sent to the Ministry of Finance, the Board of Surveys, to be discarded. And those were things that occupied the headmaster and the headmistress of long ago. And then more recently, I too can remember my days in the classroom when I had to assist the headmaster and the headmistress counting the chalk. Counting the chalk on a Monday morning, we would put 4 sticks of chalk on everybody's desk, and also counting toilet paper. I'm not sure if that happens across the Caribbean or happened across the Caribbean in your experiences. Counting the toilet paper, making sure each class had, and the headmaster and the headmistress took delight in having these as focal responsibilities. How many books were there? How many packs of crayon were there? I worked with a headmistress who, I'm not sure how she managed so many keys. The keys were never labeled, but she knew which door each key belonged to. And one headmistress told me years ago, we need to just manage this school so that we ensure that no one dies today. No one is hurt. We just get through the day, get through the term. And that, from my experience, was the long ago role and the focus of the headmaster and the headmistress. Schools were places to be managed. They were places to be managed. But today, as Wallace Foundation says, schools are now complex organizations that must possess the potential to adapt. And you heard that from Professor Miller, to learn, to grow in an ever-changing environment. Principals, therefore, can no longer be building managers to keep the rules, to carry out regulations, and to avoid mistakes. They must be leaders of learning who can develop a team delivering effective education. So therefore, times have really changed. So we've seen that principals are no longer leading in an environment where the dusty chalkboard was commonplace, although there are chalkboards now, but the dusty chalkboard has been replaced by digital versions of such, the whiteboard, and as you can see there. And principals are leading in institutions where these digital tools are taking over. So therefore, the vocabulary of today's principal has shifted to include words like Skype, iPad, Camtasia, Moodle, Facebook, Quizlet, Mentimeter. All these things are very prominent, or should be very prominent, in the words of the principal today. Even our students are aware that times have changed. Our school leaders, for the most part, are leading in schools with digital natives. Our students are digital natives born within the era of technology, and many of our teachers are digital natives, while our principals can be regarded as digital immigrants introduced to technology as adults. And a lot of the literature says that for digital immigrants who are introduced to technology as adults, they find this change, this transition, a very daunting task. So principals are surrounded by all the vocabulary, the technology, the digital toolkits, the Twitter, Firefox, Chrome. These things have become commonplace in today's schools. And what is more, with the onset of the 21st century, we all know that the world has transformed, and it has transformed business, it has transformed the economy, it has transformed education. And when we read studies coming out of the UK, for example, there was a very large project coming out of the UK, assessment and teaching of 21st century skills. This project says that in order for our leaders to be effective, they must consider these 21st century category of skills. And therefore, they must implement these ways of thinking. They must adopt these ways of thinking. They must be creative. They must be critical thinkers, problem solvers, decision makers, forever learning. And ways of working, they must adopt and to these collaborative ways of working and communicative ways of working, as Professor Miller also indicated. And they must implement certain tools for working, of course, the information and communication technology tools, and they must be literate enough to implement these tools successfully. And they must also recognize that they are living in a world of many people, and therefore they must have good citizenry, good ideas, understandings about life and career and personal and social responsibility. And what is more, there's a study on ResearchGate, Besu and Bijinaru, a 2020 study that says that leaders, not only in business, but school leadership, must possess certain leadership capabilities if they are to be successful in a digital age. And you see there, those leadership capabilities, they must be data-driven. Such a move away from that initial principle or head teacher that I showed you at the beginning, data-driven, collaborative, not only that person who was the epitome of everything, that was the revered head teacher, collaborative, customer focused, digitally literate, very learning agile, be able to adapt rapidly, and mentally agile, culturally dexterous. So these are the leadership capabilities, again, coming out of a ResearchGate study. So times have changed, and you read about digital leadership, but what is it really? Digital leadership is, according to Scheninger 2014, is about establishing direction. It is about influencing people, sustaining change, having access to information, establishing partnerships for school success. Digital leaders know how and when to give up control for teachers and students to use tools. And that's a difficult thing sometimes for leaders, to give up that control. So you're not the be all in the school, you're not the beginning and the end. You need to know when to relinquish some control, because as I said just now, we may have digital immigrants who are the school leaders, leading digital natives. So we need to be able to relinquish some control for teachers and students to use those tools to be creative so that the school in itself can be effective. So digital leadership